My name is Andy Buehler, Director of Planning and Development with Kenosha County. Next year I've been with the county for 34 years, so I take it a privilege that I know most of you here. A few of you, mainly in the city, I'm not so familiar with, but I value the relationships that we have with our office, Planning and Development, with all of you, and I'm glad to be in the know of all of you and have relationships for a long time. So, as the county executive had indicated, is in Kenosha County, because of the transmission lines network that we have and how it's been improved over the last decade and going through most of the communities, some community, or I think every community, has had some utility line upgrade that has gone through, and some of your communities also have had gas line upgrades. And so basically, from a utility standpoint, it appears that they're going through our county to have redundancy and to create loops. And so in doing that, it becomes very a prominent location for these new kind of renewable type energies or other things. And so, as the county executive said, if you're just kind of following along here, with site suitability mainly for sewer, the transmission lines is one of the main components, and you can see that on this here, is that UW Extension, that was their Stevens Point Center for Land Use Education, that put this map together, and that was to try to help and determine where solar would be most prominently to be located based upon the features of transmission lines, flat topography, and then open land. And open land mainly means agricultural land that's being farmed, not forested land. And so, because of that, as you know, we have the big one in Paris, and we have some others going on that I'll touch on. And with the gas lines that have been put in, now we have the RICE plant. So RICE plant is the reciprocating internal combustion engine. It's like a turbine. It's a new technology in a sense, where it can turn on and turn off very quickly. Doesn't take a long time to ramp up, and it goes off of gas. It is more efficient, and so there is a plant that's being looked at in the town of Paris up on KR. But talking to Summers officials on Thursday, I had learned that there still might be other locations, like in the village of Summers, that others are looking at, trying to develop more of these type plants here. So, getting into some of the things that then come into play when we have these types of utilities that want to locate in the county, we have to be aware of them. So on the second page, you can see from a solar standpoint of why this is so important for really the state of Wisconsin. If you look down at that, the state needs 31,000 megawatts to reach the goal in 2050, because in 2050, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the state wants to be completely renewable. And so if that's the case, and if that's their goal, then they need to find locations of where they can do solar utilities. And then, when you look at this and you find out that Kenosha County is one of the best locations or best counties for locating solar, then we need to be, aware of that and be ready for it. And so, just going on this before the next page, is that if you're not aware, is that there's a difference between a utility scale solar and a community scale. So if it's over 100 megawatts, that's a utility scale, and then the PSC has complete jurisdiction over it. That means we as the locals have no jurisdiction, and the best that we can do, like with what we did in Paris, is come up with an MOU, and it does appear that the developers of solar want to have the locals on board. So we did work with them for almost, what do you think, John, a year and a half to come up with an MOU. It was an MOU with Paris, an MOU with the county to address concerns that we felt needed to be addressed, many of which would have been addressed if it went through a normal conditional use permit process, which would be handled locally. And so we did get that accomplished, and it was sent to the PSC. I'm not sure how much they took it into account when they approved it, but I think we did get things addressed that we felt needed to. And so then from a community scale, which is under 100 megawatts, that's where we as locals, we can have jurisdiction over the review And typically, I would think in most of the communities, it would be through a conditional use permit process. Now, so at the county, that's how we have it set up, and I'll talk about it on the next page. But one of the things I wanted to mention here is because of the solar and the growing use of that is agrivoltaics has become very important, because solar is being placed on farmland, and many times it's prime farmland. And so there's been out there the ability to try to figure out the mix of how can you have this and still preserve the land, or to use agriculture with the land and have maybe grazing or do pollinator or something else. And so agrivoltaics is really a new area, might even be a whole new word for people that aren't even aware of, where you're combining agriculture and voltaics, which is solar. So on the next page, I just labeled this as Kenosha County Solar. So back in 2013, we were looking at making some updates to the county ordinance, and we were aware of the need for potentially having renewables being addressed in the county zoning ordinance. At that time, as we were looking at it, we didn't go with solar. We had a draft, but then as we thought about it, we were thinking, well, why would we do this? I mean, there'd be no reason for us, because we're not an area that would be, people would want to do solar. Well, 10 years later or less, basically, then we find out, because of a map like this, that Kenosha County is a site that would need to have that. And so when after Parasolar, which was the utility scale, we then had a community scale come before us in the town of Wheatland. And so the state legislature does have within the statutes that if a solar entity was coming to your community and you don't have an ordinance to address it, you have basically 3 months that you can create an ordinance. And so we ended up doing that in 3 months, which was a pretty tight timeline for county government to try to create an ordinance out of scratch. And then when we started looking around the state to try to find who was doing these things, what kind of ordinance existed, there really wasn't anything. And this was just 3 years ago in 2021. And so when we started looking at it, we saw that there really wasn't anything out there. And so for us, we felt, well, when we worked on the MOU with Parasolar, with Invenergy, it was a 1.5 year effort. And so that MOU put into place a number of different areas of concern, which we felt those are the same concerns that we would have now for a community base. So why don't we just take that as our framework and turn it into an ordinance? And then that's what we did. So I think that you just need to be aware of that, because solar is, they're looking. You may have gotten calls from others for your communities, but they're looking for other locations besides the one that is in Wheatland and is up and running. If you drive over Highway 50, the second bridge, you can look to the north and you'll see it there. And so that might be something, if you don't have an ordinance, you might want to take a look at. You certainly can look at the county ordinance. I did end up sending it out to most counties in the state just because others don't have anything, and so they're looking around, and we do have something. And so I think so we ended up getting that put in place in November of 2022. And just a couple key points I wanted to mention about that is that we have down, we don't really want to get involved so much with solar when it becomes more like for a private person, other than just needing a permit. And so we do have it listed as an accessory use, which would require a permit, just like if you were going to get a permit for your garage, because the panels can take up a lot of space. There should be some setbacks from the property line, just because the neighbors could be affected. But otherwise, the main goal of the ordinance was creating this conditional use permit process for the solar. And in that, we had a vegetation plan. We felt it was pretty important to know what was going to be happening underneath the solar panels, and we really wanted to promote, really from day one when we started having meetings with Parasolar, the fact that they would have pollinator habitat, just because we know that the bee population is struggling, and why not make use of all this area rather than it just being like grasses or low growing grasses, is that it would be pollinator type habitat, monarch habitat, so that we can help with the agriculture in our county. The other area that was a concern for us that is not for many other counties is drain tiles. So Badger Hollow was, I think, the first big utility scale solar that was done in Iowa County. And when I talked with them about, hey, how did you deal with drain tiles? And they're like, drain tile, we got like 20 feet of topsoil, and so we don't need to worry about drain tile. And I said, well, here we do, because basically every farm has a gazillion feet of drain tile, and so if you're going to be pounding in these posts for the solar arrays, they're going to hit them, and then what's going to happen? So we wanted to make sure that there was a drain tile plan in place of how they were going to address that. Decommissioning is always a concern with something like this, or some large-scale developments that, like with mining and so on and so forth, where you need to make sure that they're going to decommission, and so there's a financial assurance requirement where they have to pay that. So if they just walk away, the county has a letter of credit or a bond that can go in and do the decommissioning. And then the other thing that we put into place was just for road compensation for any damage, because there's a lot of trucks, heavy trucks, that come to provide all the panels and all the equipment, and so the roads can take a hit. So we have it set up so that there's a report beforehand and afterwards, and if there's damage, they would pay it, or they pay a lump sum. Then in regards to battery energy storage systems, so this is a new one, right? Another new one that wasn't aware of, never heard of it before, and now we're needing to address it. We're addressing it. I'll talk a little bit more about it on the second page, but on this page, I just wanted to let you know, because the main thing that comes into play is safety, and safety is based upon the type of battery energy storage system that exists out there. And so, unbeknownst to me, this has been going on for a number of years, maybe even a decade, and it's going to become more and more important, because as we move to that requirement to have, like for the state of Wisconsin as well as the nation, to be relying on renewables basically create energy during the day when it's sunny, or when it's windy, and it's usually not always windy even at night. So all that energy is made during the day. What are they going to do when we need it, like at the end of the day, when we all get home and turn on air conditioners and TVs and other things? And so there is the need, as the energy swings down, to be able to bring it back up, because we don't have the big plant like in Pleasant Prairie anymore that consistently puts out a certain level of energy. Is that there needs to be to capture that extra energy in the day, hold it, and then release it into the system when everybody needs it on a short-term basis. And so originally there were these nickel, manganese, cobalt, NMC type systems. That's what was used 4 years ago and past, and those are the ones that you might have seen in the news where there's been some fires and there's been some problems with that. And they've switched to a lithium iron phosphate type battery that is safer. It doesn't have the cobalt components that can be toxic. So there is a concern exactly, and everyone trying to learn, well, what does this mean of battery technology? What happens when there's a fire? How do we deal with that? And so I just learned 2 days ago that there's even another type of kind of battery technology out there, which is iron air mixture, which is actually a long-term. So in fact, for this system this best system that's being looked at to go in Wheatland, they're not looking at that technology, because that's like 100 hours of battery storage ability, where typically they really only want like 4 hours, like I said, at the end of the day. So the LFP seems to be the best type of battery technology currently for that. And that's always changing. They're always out there looking at trying to do things better and make things better. So from a standpoint of what it could be in the future, we don't know. And even as we've been working with Tenaska, which is the company wanting to locate this out in Wheatland, is that they can't guarantee what technology they're going to use. So when we were kind of working with them, which is the next page about the Kenosha County BEST system, as we've been looking at creating an ordinance for this, they're like, well, we can't tell you what the technology is because we haven't picked it yet. Well, they haven't picked it yet because it's ever changing. Every month there's like something new. So with this new type of technology out there and a BESS system, we did not have anything in our ordinance to address this. So just like with solar, we didn't have anything, we created ordinance, we had 3 months to be able to do it because the legislature built that into the way things get approved. From a battery energy storage system, there's nothing out there. The state isn't even up to speed on this. And so we felt we needed to do something, and so we put before the county board a moratorium for 6 months for us to be able to learn about this, create an ordinance so that when this company is ready to locate, and others, which they'll be coming to your community too if they're not already calling you, because this is going to be something really that they need to take advantage of to fill that gap with power. Well, we needed to do something. So we put that moratorium in place. We started searching around to try to find if there's existing ordinances. Just like when we were dealing with solar, there's really nothing out there. The only thing that we really found in our state was Two Rivers. The same company went before them earlier, I think it would have been last year now, I'm thinking, right? And so they created a conditional use permit process on the fly with this company Tenaska to be able to address how they would approve this system in their city, which is actually kind of right in their industrial park. So it's a little bit different than with how things are being looked at here in Kenosha County. Now with this, we did work with local fire and industry experts to try this. John is my go-to guy on renewable energies. A lot of it is happening in Paris, and John has done a lot of reading, a lot of research, and he's had to because it's all happening in his community. And so John and I have had a lot of communication, as well as I know with the county executive, to try to understand and learn this. So we had the fire department, same with Brett and his fire chief, talking with them to try to understand what their concerns are and try to be able to address the main concerns that citizens have, which is what happens when there is a fire. Because really, a battery energy storage system, it doesn't look that much different than in these community scales as like a substation, right? It's going to be a fenced-in area, it's going to be on gravel, there's going to be these what look like kind of train cars or storage cars, which were used originally but not anymore. And you're going to have it just sitting there, and it's not going to be too big of an impact on the community, but everyone's concerned with what happens when there's a fire. And so that's something that we've been looking into. And from a standpoint of looking at the key points, I wanted to stress on this is that, again, we needed to figure out how to deal with potentially a battery energy storage system not being of a utility scale where it's being put into the grid, but would basically just be maybe a business, maybe it's like a U-line that says, and not that they're in our jurisdiction, but in Pleasant Prairie, they want to have some battery backup for them, or maybe they want to have this when power is needed, and they don't want to have to take power off the grid. And so that we're looking at just to be an accessory use. We don't feel it's a big concern, but from a standpoint when it's 5 megawatts or more and it's being considered a utility scale where the energy is being fed back into the grid, that is something that we feel we do need to have some jurisdiction over, and then have been working on this conditional use permit. We do have everything tied into the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. They have been hard at work trying to put standards in place from a standpoint of how to deal with the concerns on fire with these types of systems. The other area that was a concern being that this is kind of new, the state of Wisconsin does not have a utility tax set up for this type of energy system, and so we have it set up to do a joint developer agreement to come up with a way to compensate the local municipality and the county for the lack of their ability to have a utility tax, which would come back to the community to pay for them, since it's not a taxing type way of doing taxing. So in the ability to fight or to deal with the concerns with fire, there is the need for them, the developer, to put together a hazard mitigation analysis, and that's going to be all based upon the type of batteries that they use. Each one would be different. From that, we then would have an emergency response plan, and that's where the fire departments and the locals are going to need to adopt what that plan is going to be and how it can be dealt with. Again, we have the decommissioning plan and the financial assurance so that they just don't leave everything sitting there when everything is over, because this is like 25 years. Just like solar is like 25 years, and then they look to renew for another 25. These battery energy storage is 25 years, and probably then have to swap out probably for some better type of equipment, and even within the 25 years they might be swapping things out for better equipment, better technology as they move ahead. The last thing I wanted to make with this is that because we are not the experts on this and knowing exactly how to review it, we did put in there that developer would have to pay for a third-party reviewer. This was something that Two Rivers did, and we don't exactly even know at this point who out there are the experts, but we would need to find an expert, some contractor that would be able to do a review of all the details of the submittal of this type of battery energy storage and conditional use permit, and then provide us with what their review is, things of concern, because again, we're not really the experts. So, I mean, we've been learning about it. We've had to learn about it, just like sometimes new things, you have to learn about it as it comes before your community. And I guess the main reason why we wanted to present this and the county executive wanted to have this presented today is because this is what we've been experiencing at the county. They're looking, I know they're looking because they call me, they may have called you and other staff people in your community. And so if you're not prepared for solar or battery energy storage, you might want to consider updating your ordinance so that when they do come, that you're ready to handle it and you have everything in place.
And I want to let Supervisor Brown, who's been, she's been shaking her head back there. I just want to make sure she's the chair of the PETA committee, and I know Supervisor Decker, who's not here, Wheatland is in her district, and then Supervisor Gray, who represents the Pears area. Like the three of us have really been talking a lot, and others. But again, we didn't know if you wanted to say something.
No, well, it's coming. It's coming. Supervisor Bertson and I have attended an event at Carthage College about energy coming to Wisconsin, because we're in a unique position where we're not being as affected by climate change as the coast. And it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. So thanks to you, you've done a fantastic job explaining it all. And I think we've worked out a really good process. Thank you.
Supervisor Nordigan, you kind of raised your hand, so I wasn't sure if you had something.
I just had a question. Obviously, any utilization of active farming land, whether it's housing, industrial use, electric, solar panel, whatever, it gets concerning, obviously, as our population grows, food is more and more necessary. Have we, I don't know if we have, but have you heard about putting panels over the roads? I think the Netherlands does that, over their highways and all that, and then you use less. I mean, we're going to need it, obviously, to put it in large areas, but is there anybody run across that?
So not about roads, but what I have heard is using the airport spaces and other large parking lots. So that is something that that has been talked about. When I was up at the WCA, I did attend a session in which Kenosha County and Portage County and Columbia County, which we are the epicenter for it. Portage County is 10,000 acres they want to put under solar panels. So when I talked about battery storage, there was all the supervisors want us to talk, and it's so busy down here. I got to get ours on deck first before I go talk to other counties first. So.
The benefit of them being over the roads is less snow plowing too.
There you go. So they are. I don't know how high up you have to build them to that. Yes. So, and I don't know if Chairman Butler or Chairman Holloway want to add to anything, because they have gotten a lot of knowledge of this. They have been strong here in their communities working on this.
I would just add that, all the questions we've asked when we've been approached have been given back as more questions. So, we said, when can we expect a hazard mitigation analysis? And they said, well, that's something that we would do after we're approved, which doesn't seem intuitive to me, but so ask as many questions as you can if you're approached by some of these developers. When we did some research on what Two Rivers approved, they approved a lot of things without having a lot of studies done, which I felt was concerning. And Tanaska said, well, this passed unanimously and we didn't have to do any of this in Two Rivers. And I thought, that doesn't mean we want to pass it without having any of these questions answered.
So I do want to mention with Two Rivers, why Two Rivers is such a role. They have the nuclear power plant up there, so they're familiar with power. I'm assuming that's why they sought them out.
Well, they had a huge financial crunch because of the nuclear plant closing there as well, so I think they were looking to fill some gaps.
But they actually might get retooled. Again, that's another whole component that I didn't even put in here with nuclear fusion and a couple other things that I'm following, that we're following as well. So okay. I just want Chairman Holloway and then Alderman Rose.
Just so that people are aware, is these companies do not really want to be regulated. And the more questions that we ask, we're finding that they're going to their lobbyists in Madison and trying to take away the local oversight. So just so you're aware, is that we have to be cognizant of the rules at our local level, but we also have to be in touch with Amanda and our other representatives to make sure that these lobbyists are not getting rules put in place that take away local oversight. So we have to be aware on several levels.
If I can just comment on that, as we've seen over the years, when there are some new things out there like wind, telecommunications with cellular, when communities put together ordinances and then the developers fear it's gone too far, they do go to the state legislature, and we have seen over and over again that they've then taken it from local control and putting it at the state control. And so those things I've mentioned are ones that we don't have local control over. So, right, whenever you do the siting, you can only be specific with for cell tower siting, you can only be specific with the requirements the state has put out. You can't be more restrictive. And then, and so that is something that we did talk about that. But right now, apparently we're kind of the leader in this, and maybe sometime in years in the future, their state ends up doing something, but I don't know. But right now, there isn't anything, so you need to do something. And the one thing I didn't mention that I guess I wanted to mention for us, and this is just again for you guys to consider for your own communities, is we, for solar, it is in agriculture, okay, just because of the standpoint how the land is used. But for battery energy storage, we did determine that it should be put in an institutional zoning. And for us at the county, institutional zoning is used for any substation. Some communities allow substations in any zoning district, which the county did at one time too, but then we decided that did not seem the best way to work with it, and it adds another level of protection for your community because it requires a rezoning. And rezoning is left up to the locals, and the rezoning now, as we know for the last 10 years with smart growth planning, it has to be in compliance with your land use plan, your smart growth plan, which would mean most communities don't plan for where institutional zoning is, so it doesn't exist. And so it would require a comp plan change and a rezoning, and that is something that your local communities then have as a way to be able to make sure you have as much control of where these may be located. And I know that Cassandra had a question.
Yeah, Cassandra, and then or we'll go with Jack and then Cassandra.
Yes, Andy, who did the third-party review for Two Rivers?
When I talked to them, they didn't have one yet. So I'm going to be reaching out to them on who that is.
Thank you. That would be good information.
Yes.
Cassandra.
So I have a lifetime of experience in agriculture. My parents actively farm about 5,000 acres, and I also have a background in environmental science. So I just want to mention something that I feel like may be missing that could help protect all of us, and that's soils testing. So putting these over top parking lots would be far better, or over any kind of impervious surface, than over top of soils. So if these are going to be put in as part of your decommissioning plan, prior to them going in, you should require a full spectrum soils analysis. So you know what the soils is, so that when you go to decommission them, they make sure that they remove any heavy metals or any other contaminants that end up in your soils. I think that your decommissioning plan and financial assurance will not go nearly far enough if you don't do that. Because if you do background soils tests before they go in, you know what your soil has, and then after, you know what's been added because of the stuff they're putting over top, which is not always clean. So
Great point.
And John might know a little more about that, but the other thing too is, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the decommissioning, their plan is, which is acceptable, is to cut the posts off a certain distance below grade, but leave them still in the ground. Is that correct?
No, the one police for Paris Solar is that all of the metal posts that all the arrays are, those will be physically pulled out, completely removed. The only part that their MOU allows them to leave in place is transmission cable, buried transmission cables. They cut them off, I think at 5 feet below the ground, but they are allowed to leave them in place. Now, the MOU that we have with One Energy, they are agreeing that they're gonna remove everything, so part of it is scale.
Okay. At one time, I think they were looking at leaving the posts in the ground.
They now have written that they intend to remove them.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to mention too, if you look at this here in this little conclusion section, you know, the information that is being put out there is how much for this, 31,000 megawatts of energy that the state needs, that they're looking to come from solar. They've figured out, based upon the calculations of how much 1 megawatt per 7 acres, on how many acres of farmland would be needed in the state of Wisconsin. I think it's kind of factored in there, and it's being talked about from their perspective, like that's kind of an insignificant amount of land in the state to use for solar. That may be insignificant to them, but not necessarily for when it's in your own community, especially in Paris. 2,500 acres is being set aside, 1,500 acres is part of where the solar arrays are. That's a lot of land that is being changed from its land use.
So, Sue.
We've been encouraged to look at the ordinance and then to perhaps our community develop an ordinance. Can we develop an ordinance that deters this from coming to our community?
Like a local ordinance,
Yeah,
not
like
a
a-
zoning.
Right. So
I
in
mean-
other ordinances, if we have a stricter ordinance than the county, oftentimes the county respects that stricter ordinance. Would this be applicable to that also? If we have a stricter ordinance, it might encourage the solar companies to look elsewhere.
I don't really know, Samantha might know from a state standpoint, because that's when things happen and then the state takes jurisdiction. But I think from a standpoint of having it being related to like needing a zoning change and a comp plan change, that is where you do have complete
Yes.
control.
And I'm coming to it from, you know, different parts of Kenosha County are wonderful for different reasons. And so you have to be mindful of that.
No, again, and we are, that is why we put the moratorium in place, because it was gonna come. We wanted to take a good deeper dive on something, and as, you know, when I met with Nebraska the first time, I started asking, give me 5 places in the country where you're building what you're building here. They couldn't give that. I mean, the questions, I mean, and again, I didn't get invited to a meeting, I just happened to show up at a meeting, and then they realized who I was, and then they decided, wow, I asked a lot of questions. And so then literally I called Andy and said, we need to move forward with something on this. And like I said, we are the epicenter because of all things in this. So we can't tell them no completely, because then we'll get sued. You know, that's the hard part is you know, you have to be balanced, correct, you know, on how and making it as public safety, community safety, you know, and that's why, you know, going with, you know, Chairman Holloway up and touring them. I've also toured the rice plant, because that is a different type of, another type of utility that's gonna be coming. They've got their permit at the Public Service Commission, and there are a couple of those plants in Wisconsin, so that's why we went to tour their Weston plant.
Right. The reason why I'm so skeptical, well, one of them, is when you look at this map and it goes from very suitable, which is us, to very unsuitable, which is black. One of the largest ones in the state is Iowa County, and it's in the black area.
They just don't have, but it's factors like transmission lines and things, so they might have brought in the transmission lines to specifically, and that's a 4,000 acre solar farm. That was the first large one in the state. But they do know, and that's why they're all looking down here, is that we have transmission lines, we have natural gas lines that run through our county, and we have flat land. As I drove up to WCA conference up in La Crosse, so I was looking at the different Chertok means across the counties, and again, that's why we are the epicenter. Now, I recently met with a different utility who talked about why Pleasant Prairie isn't necessarily the gold standard, and the Energy's maybe tooling around and turning that particular site into a battery storage or something, because it's on the east side, in which then they have to face different, if they build a larger scale, the non-attainment zone. So that was brought up to my attention the other day when I was meeting with some different utilities on a different question, but that came up. Why not Pleasant Prairie? They had a site there, they had the transmission lines. Well, then there's a factor of the non-attainment area, which then adds more layers. So it is ever changing, and that's why I wanted to at least brief everybody. Tim, I know you're the supervisor.
Is there any statistics on how often these battery storage units catch fire?
I'm not sure, John, you might know a little more on that one.
We went with GE, who is the builder of the batteries for the Parasolar, and everybody told us it's not a question of if, it is when. You will have fires. Everybody in the industry tells you that. So that's what Brett and I are working so hard on, is that we are not overreacting to this. We know that our communities are going to have to deal with it. So.
Well, and I want to give you another thing. I was at the pancake breakfast in Wheatland, and I was talking to Chief Danko, and he brought up something I hadn't even thought about, even though I remember the fire. So this winter, we had a big barn fire off of Highway 50, maybe a mile and a half from where I live. And he said that when they got to the scene, the barn was fully engulfed. Now again, the fire started because of a chicken light issue. It wasn't because of the solar panels that were on the side of this barn, but the first responders, when they got there, didn't realize that barn, so that We Energies had already cut off the power, the main source, but didn't realize there was power generated because of solar panels on that barn. And so that barn had two meters. Another issue that I hadn't even thought of, and so Chief Danko was asking me, is there a way to mark, because they have the little, the address markers at the front, so that people know that the first responders know that house actually has solar on it. Now that's a one-off, that's for those houses, you're thinking about a house fire or those kinds of things. Something I hadn't even thought about, that you had to call the Energies and make sure there's another power source on that structure, and it's on fire. And be careful, first responders, when you're going in. So I hadn't even thought of that until Chief Danko brought that to my attention.
There's one answer, Sue, is that you'll want to really check on that, is that the way the Wisconsin law is written right now, because Wisconsin is, as a state, has a policy of being energy carbon neutral by 2050, is that the legislation is skewed in the favor of renewables. And so you cannot put in place rules that will make it impossible for somebody to develop renewable energy. So that's why Kenosha County has a CUP to guide it, but we can only put conditions in there that affect the health and safety of our residents. We cannot put anything in there that would substantially raise the cost of producing the energy. So just so you're aware, is that the town of Raymond or a village of Raymond up in Racine County tried to stop a solar farm being put in because it did not agree with their adopted land use plan. And they lost that. They went to court and they lost because the solar did not need to comply with their land use plan. It trumped that. So just so you guys are aware, is that that you don't have a lot of tools right now with which to say no.
I kind of knew that, but I thought maybe there was something.
And I think to add on to that is the state legislature did change how the conditional use permit process operates. So about 5 years ago, there was a change. So before, a local community could put conditions in place of whatever they felt needed to address the concerns that were out there. And so that put the onus on the applicant. Now it's completely flipped. So the applicant just needs to be able to meet all the conditions. So a local municipality cannot put conditions in place to not allow them to move forward. They have to be measurable, and they need to be ones that address the concerns at hand, that aren't overly onerous. And as long as the applicant can meet those conditions, then basically the community must approve the conditional use permit. We kind of went through that with our own committee. It's not a decision of, could you deny it or not? If they can meet the conditions, you actually are required by state legislation to approve the conditional use permit process. So that's why it's important to have those conditions in place to address the concerns that your local community has.
So, Trustee Osborne.
Yeah. Kind of a related question, but just to the north of Racine County, we're building huge data centers, Microsoft is. And I'm wondering how that's going to impact our demand and supply.
That's one of the main reasons that Kenosha County is so at the epicenter, because of Foxconn, Microsoft, and we have several other large business, electric users in our county as well. So correct, that is why we are where we're at and why they need it. And now again, I was told that Microsoft may be looking to do some of their own solar around them, but again, they have to wait for their own construction to be built for their buildings. And I even know that one other large corporation in Kenosha County wants to put some solar around them as well, but they still have other phases that they're going to be building out, so they're not going to put up any solar panels that might be damaged during construction. So.
And Supervisor Brown and Gertz, I think at Carthage, right, didn't they bring that up? Because data centers are vastly growing across the nation, and they consume huge amounts of electricity, huge amounts.
Treasurer Jacobson, I'm trying to qualify everybody. I'm trying to
You can just commentary. It's okay. Andy, have you given any thought with that concern that the county executive brought up about giving data points for solar panels to first responders? I'm just making an electronic data point on our mapping system at the county, wherever they are, so that first responders who get that information from joint services would have that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, I think it's not really it's just kind of just come to light, right, from that fire, and on how that should be dealt with. Is the fire department going to know about it just because of the checks they have, but because it's not a commercial, then they will maybe not know about it. So I think the conversation really needs to be had as to what is the best way to be able to alert fire on that. Because, right, you still have electricity being generated from that system that's being fed into, and you think that you cut it off for the house, and you have concerns for the fire and rescue.
I'm thinking if it's a data point, that they would know before they even leave the door, when they get the alert for the spot, they would know what they're walking into.
And I believe that's what they did.
Yeah.
And that's what fire, again, Re-Energies was immediately notified, but they didn't realize that there was this other power source on the barn. And again, we didn't get a lot of time to after action talk about it. It was just something that he brought to my attention and seemed very reasonable. And one more question, and because I do want to leave time for updates for everybody. So,
Yeah, just to go back to the conditional use or local ordinance. So could those include soil conditions must be measured prior to any use, to get back to what was talked before about being on hard surfaces or having contaminated soils or anything. So soil conditions must equal at time of renewal, or when you come back to remove everything. That has to be done, and it must meet or be within a certain percentage and not have certain chemicals that weren't there before in the soils, as well as remove all structure, all support, all remnants, including accessories like lines, like you're talking about repairs. Could those types of things be put in? You're not restricting, but you are confining to what it is that you're going to do from the beginning to the end.
I would believe you could, and it would be in the decommissioning plan that would have to be submitted, and part of the application.
Okay. And then to get back to the Microsoft thing, 3 Mile Island Reactor 1 was just sold to LinkedIn, which is owned by Microsoft. So you know the kind of power that they need to have a nuclear reactor run their data center.
So the power is coming back. Okay. Alex, we'll let you go too. What?
Thank you. Quick question, what is the benefit of, to a community to have
To have the battery storage? I mean, this is that bigger question. This is something that we're not gonna answer today. This is, I mean, I actually heard 2031, We Energies wants to be carbon neutral here, and that's why they're moving so hard to get all their permits in as much as they can. So those conversations are coming.
but there is no direct benefit?
Yeah, I think Wheatland asked that question.
Yeah, we did ask that question. Many of our residents posed that to Tenaska, and there is no direct benefit to the neighboring community. There's no lower utility rates. So that's where Tenaska came in and said, we are willing to give you X amount of dollars per year to make this worth having in your community. So that is not required at all in their plans or in their developers agreements, but that is something that you can ask for, which I would recommend. But then you have to weigh out, is it worth having that risk for the amount of money that they're willing to pay to be there?
Well, and if you think of it from any standpoint, there is usually never any, that I can think of, direct benefit from any type of utility being in your district other than someone has to have them, right? Otherwise your residents aren't going to be getting power.
That's true, but this takes up a huge footprint. And then you're using development land to develop or farmland, and so, and tax incentives and tax benefits for a community. So, I guess.
It's like having a gravel pit. Everybody wants gravel and the resources that come with it, but no one wants it in their backyard.
And that's what the shared utility tax is, and then what Brett was talking about with the offset, with the pilot, with the payment in lieu of taxes. So those are those conversations that we're having both locally and with the lobbyists from the Madison component. We are participating in the Wisconsin Utility Tax Association. Actually, our finance director, the county board just approved Patty being on there specifically so that we could have somebody who's very knowledgeable on the tax side of things and making sure that we as a county are made whole and helping to have the conversation about Paris will be at their cap. So when the solar farm is completely online, there's no more additional utility aid that Paris can receive right now. Two Rivers has already been at their cap for years, but that's because they produce most power in the state of Wisconsin is literally produced on Two Rivers. So yes, so those are further conversations. But I am going to transition because I want us to leave time for updates for municipalities. And again, I appreciate Andy and you giving an overview.